So as we round the corner for the end of this course, we're taking all the things that we've learned so far and we're going to put them together to see how you apply it. So we're going to talk about customer acquisition. And so the last section was about the digital age, and now we apply digital and physical to what we're doing. And so today we're going to talk about the product evolution, the 19 options, which is basically the 19 different ways you can sell, and how do we go about and applying it. And so different products require different interactions. There is no one hard and fast rule, but the thing we do know is it's about getting customers, keeping customers, and growing customers. And hopefully you have a loop going on where where after they purchase stuff, they're still involved with you. And so if you recall, pain is worth 3 times what gain is. And that rule is true depending on the reference point. Like if I'm dealing with somebody who's extremely wealthy, it's very hard to add gain into their lives. On the other hand, if I have somebody who's middle class or something like that, it's a lot easier. But what it comes down to is we buy things because we perceive that we're going to come out with a net gain. And so the question is how do you manage that perception? And so there's one of 2 ways of going about it. Either I need a lot of gain. Now keep in mind, it's net gain. Or I can reduce a loss. But one thing that really holds a lot of products back is risk, uncertainty. I don't understand. If you have risk, that starts increasing the loss. It has nothing to do with your product. It's a perception of risk, or those risks might actually exist. And risk also decreases your gain. So it has a twofold effect, and both of them aren't good. But the key word in all this is how does a customer value it? Now an example of that is let's go back and look at the pricing curve. Now the pricing curve for corporations is basically this. They're just pure economists. They go out and get survey data. They figure out what the demand is, what the cost is for them to supply, and then they pick the equilibrium point. That's how they determine price. For you who gets involved in a startup, you need to figure out what the parity price is. About, how much do people value this? And if you're too low, then you become a commodity. And it's kind of hard to be special to anybody if you're just a commodity. If your pricing is too low, then you could be perceived as a low quality product. So you don't want to go too low. A little bit below your discount. But what it comes down to is when you function below parity, price becomes a very big part of the discussion of whether or not I purchase from you. And that is not a good place for a startup to be. You need profits. You need cash flow. So what you want to be doing is operating in the premium area. And this is what Senor Chavez, for those of you who take him in TEM, refers to as the reef. That you want them talking about the experience and the perception of your product, the things they like about it. You don't want them talking about price. And finally, or I shouldn't say not talking about it, but the main point of your conversation. And then there's out of bounds pricing. Nobody is ever going to pay $1,000 for a hamburger unless it's the last cow on earth. I mean, let's face it, you can play it up all you want, but unless you're like starving or something like that, it's just not going to happen. Now, how do we get people to act? Well, if you remember from behavioral economics, the 2 factors that drive what people are willing to do is what are the stakes? Are they low or are they high? And then is it a gain or is it a loss? And that's why pain, if you're addressing pain, it becomes the easiest thing to sell because again, it's 3 times gain. Not only that, but people are more willing to take risks with regard to it. It has to have a value, which is Maslow. Now, risk hurts my gain and can increase loss. So how does Amazon get around it? They've got millions of products that nobody ever heard of. Well, that's what those reviews come in for. And that's the way Amazon goes about taking away risk. The other way they take away risk, anybody want to take a shot at it? returns, right? If I don't like it, just return it. It's like insurance. And so this is where you start taking away all the logical reasons why people say no. So summarizing everything all up, and that's what this chart is first I need to know the personality type, because the personality type will tell me what their tendencies are going to be in making decisions. What are the gain and losses? Can I address pain? What is their elasticity? How sensitive are they going to be to pricing? Am I working in low stakes or high stakes? Again, high stakes favor people taking risks on reducing loss, which is what pain is about. And then finally, the triggers. Somewhere at some point, I need an emotional trigger to get them over the hump. And so the way some of those triggers, and typically risk is the biggest blocker of triggers. And so this is where influencers and recommenders become so powerful, because if people hear from other people, the herd mentality, if other people are doing it, then I guess it must be okay for me to do it too. And you see herd mentality in everything. Speeding cars. One guy goes faster, guess what? Everybody else who wants to go faster follows him. You really have to understand all the details about how your customer does everything, every step of the value chain. What journey do you want to take them on? What processes do they go through? And the thing is, buying food is like different than buying furniture. And do brands matter? Well, where brands matter is that's the way you're communicating to the customer about your values and everything else. In terms of the decision process, remember this, first is about awareness and interest. We evaluate our options, and then based on the outcomes, we feed it back. If you recall from the quiz, we are systematic. Everybody kind of goes through the same process when they make a decision. Some are better at it than others. However, we can be inconsistent and we can be random, but the process is still the same. So the factors we're concerned with, again, pain has a very big point. Touch points. Where do I want to come into contact with the customer? How often? What's kind of engagement? Triggers, or how do I induce movement? Like, for example, I don't want to buy that. Ooh, I got a 30% coupon. Yeah, I guess I'll do it now. That's an example of a trigger. And the attributes are, do you really understand the variables that affect people? For example, Jack Chin, who's a TEM major, has a company, Moto 8. They make motorcycle kits. And he was thinking, gee, a lot of people aren't going to want to buy motorcycle kits during the winter because they can't go out and ride. He found out it was exactly the opposite. The people who own motorcycles aren't interested in a kit. They're tinkerers. They want something to work on. And during the winter, they can't ride. So they get kind of restless. They want something to work on. And so he actually found out he had a lot of interest. And so time evidently wasn't as big a factor as he thought it was in terms of attributes. We've talked about digital and physical, building awareness, consideration, purchase, service, and loyalty. And so picking out how we're going to get from one end to the other, that's the customer journey I'm interested in. And in particular, the front three are what you as a startup are most interested in. When you sit down and go through a product, you can map it out. And so here's an example where you think about keep and grow. And so think about the pain points, the process, and financially, what's the bottom line in all this? And so I filled out a sample one for you. And brands, do you have any kind of brand you can leverage? Like, for example, IKEA has a big effect. Dr. B.J. Fogg of Stanford University has worked on triggers. What is it that makes people act in a certain way? And what he's saying is a person's behavior is a function of how motivated you are, ability. Ability also means convenience, meaning how easy or hard is it for me to achieve something. And finally, what's the emotional thing that triggers me? For example, I could be a great mountain climber. I've always wanted to climb Everest. However, it costs $100,000 to climb Everest, so I'm not going to be able to do it. So what happens? I have great motivation, but I don't have the ability to do it. So that's why I'm not going to climb Everest. On the other hand, I win the lottery, I get $10 million. All of a sudden that could be the trigger. I do now have the money. So now I want to go ahead and do it. And so the thing about motivation and triggers and things like that, it's like communication. It may be too much of a jump to take somebody at one step, but you could take it in multiple steps. And so what Fogg came up with is this curve. And what he's saying is that if your ability, or it's simple to do, is high, as you could see, there's not that much difference to action. On the other, if you have extremely high motivation, like hell or high water, I'm going to make it to Everest, then all of a sudden that barrier goes down quite a bit. And so a good example of this is Amazon, and that's that all the barriers that had to do with online shopping, Amazon did away with. So ability and simplicity is very, very high. And so the fact that you get on the website, motivation's high, and this is why they're in the top 10 for conversion rate, up around 10%. In terms of a startup, how do you get traction? Well, there's something called the 50% rule. Spend half your time on your product, half of your time on trying to get customers interested and engage with you and buying. It takes time to find the right channel. You have to experiment. You have to see which is the best way to attract a customer. And a good example is Dropbox. Dropbox thought, oh, let's do search engine. And it was costing $230 a customer. And then on a $99 product, and then what they started doing is they started doing the referral program. And so then it started dropping into the $10 or less range. The thing about marketing, bottom line for a startup, is this is a full-time job. If it comes time for you to sell, you can get away with part-time people, but you're going to need a lot of them. I mean, it is a full-time job to chase this kind of stuff. And in the next lecture, we'll start talking about the different ways to sell.